With some information that some of it not too exciting, other information fairly exciting. I like to see Jared up there. Jared's a resource that you guys have. I didn't even know about him, by the way, Valerie. That's cool. So a resource like that, leverage those type of guys because they will definitely help you move some things forward. What I want to talk with you guys about is wealthy soil. You've heard about soil health, right? We've all heard this thing about soil health, but you know what? You guys have to make a living out of your soil. You guys have to make money out of your soil. You have to create a soil that has the ability to create wealth for you. Would you agree? You don't stay in business if you don't make money. You're no different than any other business out here, right? So one of the things that I want to share with you is how the water ties into that and what you can do as a producer to grow more wealth in your soil. This has been a focus for me for a little over 20 years. And there are many things that I've learned working with water from the Carolinas to Washington, all over the country. And right here in Nebraska, we have some of the greatest opportunities to grow wealth from our soil, but we have to learn how to do things differently. How many of you would say that in the last 10 to 15 years, hybrids have changed corn? Pretty substantially, right? And there's a lot of opportunity in that technology. That is technology that's built into your corn products. Soybeans, things that we've learned about soybeans. I had a farmer call me a while back, and he's calling me from the combine. He says, this is the message I get from him on my phone. He says, Kylen, call me, we got to talk. Now, if you're a supplier and you're helping farmers and the farmer says, hey, we got to talk and hangs up the phone, you're probably not real excited to call him back. So I called him back 15 minutes later after I'm trying to figure out what I screwed up. And he says, hey, he says, I'm picking 76 bushel soybeans. I said, hey, that's not great, but not horrible. What's up? He goes, I got 82 bushel dryland corners. What do I do? I'm like, oh my goodness, because I was helping him with his water. So now the dryland corners are out producing the center pivots. And I said, okay, tell me which field it is. I'll see if I can figure out what I did wrong. And come to find out, I wasn't even helping him on that field. But what he told me, he said, Kylen, all the fields that you've helped me with on water management, we're making 95 plus. What are the things that we can do on these fields to make more money with soybeans? And those are the things that I'm here to help you guys with. Show you how you can create wealth from the soil. You have to start in the soil, otherwise it just simply doesn't work. Kind of like this clicker. So I thought this quote was kind of cool. Each soil has its own history, like a river, a mountain, a forest, any natural thing. Its present condition is due to the influence of many things and the events of the past. Here's what I know. When we think about this, right now we are creating the history of our soil. Every decision that you have made coming into this growing season determines the wealthy capacity of your soil. Every decision that you make this year is going to determine the wealth capacity of your soil next year. That's a promise because we're impacting that soil. We're influencing that. The 3 I's in 3I Water is influence, impact, and income. That's what we teach in 3I Water. We're an education company. What's influencing you? What's influencing the soils? What's influencing decisions? Influence, it all starts right there. So as we start thinking about this, why do I talk about wealth in soil instead of soil health? Because it comes from the old English word weal, or however you want to say that. It's happiness and prosperity in abundance. Last year, I worked with a farmer out in Indiana, a totally different part of the country than this. I understand that. His neighbors were pulling in anywhere from, 110, maybe $130 an acre in profit last year. He pulled in $430 an acre. Why? Because he focused on things that create wealth in the soil. He did a totally different focus on inputs, a focus on nitrogen management, for example. He's actually reduced nitrogen load by up to 60%. Nitrogen demand reduction by 60%, that's a big deal. Why? Because he's changed how his soil works. So what I wanted to really share with you guys today is a core question. These are some of the questions that I ask my producers when we start working with them. How do our water management decisions impact soil? We start with that. Water quality is a big part of it. Water quality, every time you pump water out of the ground, it's going to have a mineral in it that's either going to be positive or negative to the nutrition that you have in your soil. It's going to be positive or negative to the biological activity in your soil. We don't know unless we test it. What can we learn about water management by listening to the plants? That's a big one. I love to have conversations with farmers about listening to plants. And how can we use water-focused technology to help create more profitable cropping systems? This is where it often gets messed up. So I want to talk with you guys a little bit today about this one. What can we learn by listening to plants? How do we listen to the plants? What are the plants going to tell us? Those are things that I really, really have learned in the past to make sense of what's happening in the root zone. The roots are going to determine your fruits, my friends. The quality of your roots are going to determine the quality of your harvest. It's just plain and simple, okay? There's 3 types of soil moisture probes that I've worked with over the years. And here's the thing that I know. Soil moisture probes, if used properly, are not about soil moisture at all. They're about plants. It's about plant management. The soil moisture in and of itself isn't going to make you any money. The plants are going to make you money. The plants are your opportunity. So I'm going to show you 3 different types of sensors. Valerie showed you one this morning, which is a tensiometer. That's what the watermark is. I've used watermark for a long time. They have their place, but they have one major flaw. And the one flaw that I found in a watermark sensor, I can't tell when I'm overly wet. It's one of the struggles. It's one of the struggles with them. So there's a second type of sensor, a capacitance probe. And a capacitance probe has a lot of value if it's used correctly. These probes have been completely oversold and have been underdelivered for years and years and years. How many of you happen to have a capacitance probe or have used one in the past? Might be Centec, AquaSpy, something of that nature. Not very many of you? Got a couple? Okay, perfect. Well, I'm going to share with you guys some things today about that probe. And we also have time domain reflectometry sensors. These are often used in science and research and things of that nature. But the one that I'm going to really focus on today is this capacitance probe. Why? Because over the years that I've used sensors and I've used in-field technology, this one is bar none the best tool, if used right, to actually make money in your root zone. But they have to be used right, because these sensors will actually teach you how to listen to the plants. Has anybody ever actually showed you how that sensor works? It's real simple. That sensor gets put into the ground. They're multi-sensor systems. This happens to be a Centec sensor, and I use several different brands. One that I'm really, really fond of today, I'm going to show you the data on today, but this is a Centec probe. They're all very much the same. The difference, by the way, in capacitance probes, AquaSpy, Centec, CropX, you got all these different probes out here, right? You know what the difference is? It's like the difference between Case and IH, or Case and John Deere, right? It's your preference. What do you want to use? What makes the most sense, right? That's really what it comes down to, because this technology is all similarly the same. So how does this work? You put that sensor in the ground, and then it's actually sending a signal every 30 minutes. It'll send a signal out into the ground, into that soil profile, and it will read 100% of the water molecules around that probe. All it does is just starts vibrating the water molecules. And every 30 minutes, just imagine if you got your agronomist to go out there and pull soil data every 30 minutes and tell you how to irrigate, right? That's an expensive dude right there. So every 30 minutes, it pulls a reading. And it tells you whether that soil profile has increased or decreased at any given level. That's all it is. Every time it pulls a reading, it starts putting together a story that happens inside the root zone. And that's what I want to share with you today, is that story. When we're putting together, holy cow, this presentation's in a hurry. When we start thinking about the cropping system, guys, there's actually 3 phases that I help all my growers work with. First of all, phase 1 is it's basically from planting till about V12, okay? When you go through that phase, that is a prep to pollinate phase. All we're doing is we're prepping the plant to pollinate. If we were doing anything else, it'd be a waste of time. But we are preparing that plant to reproduce, okay? That's it. Well, right about the time, if you look at that red line up there, that red line is what an average center pivot can apply in central Nebraska after evaporation and runoff potential, okay? Well, right about the time we start getting into pollination, we start hitting that peak. So peak water use starts to, it's actually a little bit higher than what we can typically apply in a lot of cases. Now, new seed technology, by the way, is helping this. So we have to change our management practices to match the seed technology that we have. We got to remember that, okay? So one of the things that we're finding is, what do we do during this critical stage to make sure that we can use all the water down here, keep the soil oxygenated, which is another thing. You got to have oxygen in your profile. How do we know that we have deep roots, deep, active, healthy roots? How do we do all this and make it all work? That's what I want to share with you today. Now, one of the things that people often tell me about soil moisture probes, it's just one place in the field. It's just one place in the field, and I would agree with that. It's one place in the field that we're monitoring every 30 minutes from the root zone. So the question is, what can we do with that every 30 minutes? When we start watching a plant drink and we pay attention to what the plants are doing, this is why I love capacitance probes. When we put a probe in and it starts to show us a story, the graphs start to tell a story, we have to learn how to listen. Listen to what we're seeing. Listen to what the plant is telling us. Because the plants, during the day, they will draw water out. And all this graph is showing us is the time moves forward and water comes out. That's it. Water is drawing down during the day. Photosynthesis is happening, water's going down. At night, just like you need to rest. You need to shut down. Your plants need to shut down. Your plants need to rest at night. And we can see that on a graph. The next day, the next morning, it takes off. So we have a daytime, nighttime time. Daytime, nighttime activity. We can see exactly what that root system is doing. Pulling the data set every 30 minutes. Now, if we start looking at the full season, or we start looking at the early season, when we got small plants out there, I mean, little bitty small plants, we don't use a lot of water, do we? But then all of a sudden, somewhere along the way, we start pulling up a lot more water. Without a soil sensor, you honestly don't know when that happens. You might have a crop model, you'll have an estimate, but you don't know until you can see it at the root zone, okay? So here we are, small little plants. You can see it starts to draw out water. We have a wetting event, increased it, start to draw a little bit of water, a wetting event, boom. Then we have a wetting event and man, this thing just starts taking off. The stair steps get much bigger. In the same amount of time, we got a lot drier. But what's next? Do we put on the same amount of water? See, here's a question for you as an irrigator, and I'm an irrigator myself up in Arcadia area. Here's the question I had to ask my own family farm. What's more important, rate or timing? What's the most important, rate or timing? So if I ask those two questions, not always the easiest to answer. So when this starts to happen, we use a lot more water. Do I increase my rate? Do I stay with the constant? What's best? As we move forward, I want to start seeing what's happening in the whole cropping season. See, this is the same exact graph, but now we started pulling a lot more water here in July, and then we maintained a constant water flow all the way through to September, to where we harvested actually in October. But here's something that I want to share with you. This is where we started. That was full. This was our management system. This was our management line. Below full, about 90% full. Why do I not want the soil profile completely full? Because I don't know if it's going to rain. Don't know, have a clue there. But there's another thing. Oxygen. I need oxygen in the root zone. Oxygen is just as important as water if you're going to grow a healthy, wealthy crop. Oxygen is critical. What's the one trait built into almost every seed technology out here today? Drought tolerance. Can you over-irrigate a drought-tolerant crop and get a great effect? Think about that for a moment. If drought tolerance is built into any of our technology and we over-apply water, will it work? Is that going to give us the greatest effect? No. Now, what I like about the probe that I'm using today, we're actually looking at full season data. We put a probe in once and we leave it in. We have a permanent capacitance probe. We put it in, we leave it in 365 days a year. We don't pull it out. It's one of my favorite probes on the market today. Why? Because it's there before you plant. Let me show you this. When we start looking at the cropping season, look, there's 3 cropping seasons of unbroken data. We never pull it out, so we can see how dry it gets in the off season. We see how dry it is between all winter long. I know what it's doing. We get a snow event, I know what it does. When it melts, I know everything. I can see every rain event, which I'm going to show you some data on because it's crazy what we're learning there. But here's the thing, most important thing, I always know where my full point is. After I determine where a full point is in any given field, I know where it is with a permanent sensor. I never lose that. Our longest running sensor right now has 2,090 days of data in it. Unbroken continuous data for 2,090 days. And if you're a young farmer and you want to farm for the next 15, 20 years, how important would it be for you to have permanent data for the next 15 years, right? The next 15 years of your career, every cropping cycle, every root system, everything that you plant in there for the next 15 years, what could you learn from that? That's huge. This is actually one of our data sets right now. Then this is our forecasting. So we've already plugged in next season's crop. We know where the full point is. We know how full we have to be in order to plant and be in healthy, wealthy conditions when we start. We know where we need to be. So that's predictive. I can start predicting how much rain I need. I can start predicting if I need to start the pivot to get seed up out of the ground. I can start predicting a lot of things when my probe is there all year around. But most importantly is what we see in the off season. When we start looking at what's happening in the off season, guys, you will learn with permanent sensors, with data that's tracking your soil profile 365 days a year. You will learn more about the health of your soil. You will learn more about your soil structure by watching the off season than you ever will in season. This is mind-blowing for me. I started watching permanent data in 2019, and there's a lot of things that I've been teaching people for years about water, and I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. I know some of you in here have heard me before because you were part of my crop metrics days. But I can promise you, there's a lot of things that I taught back then that I know today is not true. Why? Because we've got probes in the ground that we have never removed. We're tracking 365 days a year. I'm going to show you a couple of those examples. These are just long-term data sets. This right here started to blow my mind. Soil structure. How important is soil structure? Would you agree that it's important? Soil structure is critical. Do you know there's a training, there's information that I used to share with people, and it was this: 24 hours after a saturating rain event, we hit field capacity. The water will drain out in 24 hours and you'll be at full field capacity. In most fields, that is not true. That's not true. And I've been teaching that for years. But here's what actually is happening. This was a field, you can see the data here. This is February. This is in western Nebraska, right on the western Nebraska-Kansas border. So pretty dry. We started getting some rain events. We started increasing moisture content at the top sensor. Top sensor in this case is 8 inches. So 8 inches below the root zone is our top sensor. The second sensor is at 12 inches. But as we start looking at that, I started noticing some things. Number one, the wetting patterns. My wetting pattern worked really well. I infiltrated water all the way down to 12 inches like I would expect. But that wetting event started to increase the moisture content at 20 inches, and it drug out for 5 days. And then we got another wetting event, a small one, that wetting event right here. It wet down to 28 inches, and it slowly filled that profile over the course of 12 days. For 12 days, it drained water into the next portion of the profile. I've been teaching everybody that we'll hit field capacity, we will drain out, and we'll stop moving water after 24 hours. That's not true. This water was still drawing through for 12 days. Now, I started to realize as I'm looking at this data that we have a soil structure problem in this field. We do not have a healthy, wealthy soil profile. If it's taking that long to get the water to move through that profile, we got a problem. So this field, we're putting covers on, we're putting some biology activators in there. I'm not a big fan on biology as a whole, but biology activation is huge. We need to feed what you already have. We're doing a lot with that. Feed your biology. Why? Because that helps fix soil structure. So we're starting to see all the way down through this soil profile, other than our top 12 inches, we had a soil structure issue. So we're addressing that. We can see that with our data. All the way through the root zone, we have an issue. I would never have seen that if I would have put the probe in when my corn was already up out of the ground. I never would have seen that. Had to see it in the off season. Now, another set of data that we're starting to see is leaching. Leaching events with wetting events. You know, we got nitrates in our groundwater. We've hit that already today. We understand that. We got that. The question is, how much of that is caused by rain? How much is caused by irrigation? What can we control and what can we not control? What can we do about it? Well, one of the things is we have to get really, really good at understanding what leaching is. When does it happen? When's it my fault? When's it nature's fault? When can we blame God for this? And when do I have to take the blame? Right? This is one of the things we've started seeing in permanent data is how to manage or see any of these leaching events. This is also a tool that we use to start helping people understand how much they can get rid of their upfront nitrogen, depending on how much we leached out in the off season. In season's totally different. If I'm managing nitrogen in season, I'm looking at temperature, I'm looking at moisture movement. Temperature and moisture movement. Out season, I'm looking at temperature and moisture movement. That's what I'm looking at. And that's what we're seeing here. That little blip, if I can see over irrigation where water comes up and it drops right back off, comes up and it drops right back off to the same level it was before, I have wasted my water. Completely gone, zip, dilp, gone forever. That didn't do me any good. And when it rains and that happens, there's not a thing you can do about it. But you irrigate and that happens, there's a lot you can do about it, okay? Those are the things that we're looking for. How many people in here happen to put cover crops in once in a while? Yep. Are you still in the process of learning, do cover crops really pay? Does it work? Is that kind of where we are? Another thing about permanent probes, I know the very hour that a crop will break dormancy if I've got a cover crop in. I know the very hour that it will break dormancy. So if you're going to burn it down, you want to conserve water, you want to know when it happens, we can see the very moment that that crop breaks dormancy. I want to know that. So I want to see it, especially if I'm going to burn it down, if I'm going to terminate it for some reason. But the cool thing is, I've got farmers right now. I've got a farmer out in western Nebraska. He's a 30,000 acre farmer. He's a business partner of mine. We've been friends for years, farms 30,000 acres. And guess what he's doing? He's not terminating any of his covers anymore. He's managing it so totally different. He's even planting alfalfa and putting corn in it. Plants alfalfa for 1 year, pulls the harvest off, plants the corn right in his alfalfa, lets the alfalfa grow because it's a mode of action. Anybody ever have trouble killing weeds? If you're having trouble with weed pressure, he's addressing it naturally. And he's using nature to fix his weed problem. He's also fixing nitrogen issues and many other things. Cut out almost 2/3 of his whole entire input program so he can focus on high quality seed, quality irrigation, and oxygenation in the soil profile. He's tracking this to a T. He knows when that breaks dormancy. He knows when it's going to start costing him money and what money he has to put back in to make money. Knows how to do it. So when you start looking at those types of things, there are opportunities, but what do you do with those opportunities? Okay? Now, in season with a permanent sensor, one of the greatest struggles that every capacitance probe has ever had is calibration. You put a probe out there and the calibration is always an issue. Anybody ever used a probe and they didn't trust it? Yep. Guess what? Been there. And for almost 15 years, I've taught people how to deal with these calibration issues. And I can still teach you how to deal with it today. But there's one thing I can promise you, I do not know, and neither do you. When you put a probe in the ground and your crop is already growing, there's one thing you don't know. Is the soil profile completely full? You don't know that. I don't know that. If the crop is already growing, we don't know what full is. We have to assume. And that's why when you put a probe in the ground, you have to set a full point. And it's an educated guess. That's all it is. And that's a struggle. Because here about 2 years ago, remember when it wasn't full when we started? Do you know it didn't get full all year? Do you remember August come around and you couldn't keep up? Anybody remember 2013, the year following the drought, when we couldn't keep up? Believe me, guys, I know how bad of mistakes we can make by looking at probes that are not properly calibrated. So the one thing I love about a permanent sensor, because it's never taken out, it's always calibrated after the first year. The first year, it's no different than anything else. It's no different than any other sensor. But after year one, I know where I'm at. The numbers never change. The data stays the same. Now I can tell where my full point is. I can start trusting the data. But the other thing is, when you start getting really good at managing a root zone and timing your irrigation, this right here, my friends, this is the graph that will make you money. When you use water, which is actually your only in-season input that you can manage with. Think about it. Your seed's already planted, your fertilizer's already on. You can't really manage anything else except water when you're under irrigation. Think about it. Maybe you can throw some nitrogen out there, maybe you can put some other inputs in with your water, but water's all you really got. So how do you use that to your advantage? This right here is the graph that I showed you earlier, that long-term data. We start pulling water out at 12 inches, and then we start pulling water out at 16 inches. I don't know why that's not working. We can see the stair steps at each individual sensor. This bottom sensor right here is 48 inches deep. But what's really interesting, when I start pulling that data, I want to know where my roots are. I want to know how deep in the profile that plant really is. And I want to be able to see every single time that root hits a certain layer in the root zone. If I know that, if I know where the roots are, and I can trust that data, now I have to learn how to change my application rates, keep my oxygen soil ratios healthy, because oxygen, air in the profile, moisture content will determine how deep I can push water. And when I irrigate with an 800 or 900 gallon a minute well on a quarter, I have to get a lot of water deep quickly or it runs away. And we all know what that's about. So I have to get water deep. How do I do that? By tracking these lines right here. This is what I'm looking for. I don't know why my mouse isn't quite working right. But these lines right here, right there, if that would come together, it would show me right there. Those right there are priceless. Those are indicators of making money. That's irrigation events that are making you money. Here's why. When my plants are really small in the early stages and I'm just putting down water, I still want to infiltrate water as deep as I can to the active root zone. But when my roots start going deeper, I need to increase my application rate to match the depth of my root system. And I will put on as much water as I can without runoff and leaching with every irrigation event. Earlier, I asked a question, which more important, rate or timing? They're both important. And what I try to do is put on as much as I can without runoff and leaching. So my timing is critical. Timing is critical. Timing is probably what makes you more money than anything else that you could do, is timing of your application of water. If you get your timing right and you can push water down into your root zone 24 inches, you're drawing oxygen with it. Oxygen comes in with that water and it will dry down the surface faster, allowing that deep water to pull up through the plant. Transpiration makes you money. Evaporation costs you money. Transpiration makes you money. The deeper you can drive that water, the better off you're going to be. And you can see here, we kept everything pretty tight until about August, and you could see the gaps starting to build. just simply could not keep up. But if we didn't have that deep root system here, when we started getting to the point where we couldn't keep up, those bottom roots kept this crop alive. First year farmer over by Aurora, I helped this year, was really tough for him to slow down because it wasn't used to that. We were able to slow down the pivot, and we put about 30 bushel better yield into that field than he had ever had. 30 bushel better, just pushing water deeper. That's all it is. How can we learn to track what our roots are doing? How can we learn to push water deeper? Deep water will make you money. Now, I have one last slide here that I'd like to run through with you, and I think it's my next one. I don't know why that just keeps going. There's a lot of stories I can tell with this slide deck. I'm going to get to the last one, though. This one right here. This one right here, if it'll pull up. Valerie, remind me to fix this before our next meeting, because that's really a mess. Believe me, I will. It's irritating. We'll just do it that way. This is a field that I had cover crops on. A good friend of mine, very aggressive regen farmer. And I know there's a lot of different opinions about regenerative agriculture. I'd love to chat over some of that stuff with you guys. But at the end of the day, water is the big differentiator. This is a guy, if you remember last spring, we got a whole bunch of water in eastern Nebraska, right? I mean, it was dry and it didn't look like it was going to rain. And then when it rained, it just cut loose and rained. Remember all that? This guy ended up with 8 inches of water in 18 days. 8 inches in 18 days. That's not the kind of rain we really want, right? Especially early in the season. However, because of his cover cropping, he was cover cropping. You can see when it was really starting to pull water early on, he was having trouble getting his crops in. We finally got crops in right in through this period here. But we got the crops in, and you can see, if you could count the stair steps of how many days he was shut off in July and August, he'd put 0 water on in July and August. 0. No water. His profile was full. But the reason that he's able to go that many days without any irrigation, his water holding capacity with his cover crops is so bloomin' high. He was holding so much water in that root zone that 8 inches that he received in 18 days, none of it went below the bottom sensor. He held 100% of that water in his own root zone. He also held nitrogen there, guys. That stayed in the root zone. It didn't leave the root zone. Now, I can show you multiple different graphs of fields that are not this condition in the same 8-inch rainfall. 2/3 of that water left the profile. If that water left the profile, so did the nitrogen. This held everything. You can see it right down here. All these heavy rains, he's holding water. You can see we increased water there. That's a deep sensor. That's about 20 inches. He's holding all these water events, and then he draws it out, draws it out, draws it out. Drew all that water down to 48 inches. He's drawing that back out. When it shut off and quit raining, he did not need to irrigate. Now compare that to the guy that still irrigated another 8 or 10 inches, who made more money. And he's got a healthier profile. When you learn how to use sensors and trust the data, because the data is quality and calibrated, you will make sense with it. You will make money. And the healthier that you get your water management, the more you improve your water management system, whether you're using sensors or some other technology or some other system, I don't care what you're using. But the more you improve your water management system, the more your soil health will improve. And as a byproduct of that, you will create wealth from your soil. Your soils will make you money. And that, my friend, is what we're all really wanting to accomplish. So you can reach out to me. We can talk about probes. We can talk about the stuff that's available through the NRD. Like I said, I would challenge you to leverage every resource that this organization has. Leverage every opportunity, and feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to work with you on your technology, discuss different options for cover cropping, regen practices, any of those things. Because if you can build wealth in your operation, if you're a young farmer today and you want to create something for your family, start building in your soil. It's the only option you have. The soil will make you more money than any green or red piece of equipment out there. It'll make you more money than any shop you can build. Your soil is the most valuable resource at your disposal. So let's work on that. We'll make you some money. All right, thanks, guys.